MAME phase.
This is a quick video covering the emulation of a plug-and-play device in MAME. This time it's Codename Kids Next Door, Operation P.L.U.G.G.U.H.S. Kids Next Door was a kids show that aired on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s, and the game is from around the same period. The software was developed by one-man band and published by Tech2Go, and it runs on a SunPlus SPG240 series chip, which many of the plug-and-plays from around the same time also use. Once you boot the unit up, there are 5 different games available for selection, and you can complete these in any order. Completing them all gives you the end credits. The first of the games, Operation Mansion, or Madman's Attack Nearly Scorches Impeccable Operative's Noggin, is a walk-along and shoot platformer. While walking along, you'll be dodging lasers fired from security turrets, spikes in the ground, and the odd enemy that will also try and shoot you. One thing you'll quickly notice is there's no score system. This is quite ironic given that the title of the unit, when expanded from P.L.U.G.G.U.H.S, is Play Lots of Unbelievable Games, Getting Ultra High Scores. I'll now be quiet as the rest of the level plays out. Most games have a boss at the end of the level. This boss can usually be dispatched just by spamming the attack button, and that actually seems like the best strategy for most of them because jumping over them often doesn't work. The second game I'm going to look at is Operation Island, which is investigating stolen lovable apes needs doing. This is probably the easiest of the games, as you can just take the top route, which is some platforming, to find all the apes. When you're around an ape, an exclamation mark will appear above your player character. Just find all the apes and you complete the level. This one doesn't even have a boss. For the third game, I'm going to look at Codename Sneezy, which is Snotty Nemesis endlessly engages zipping youngster. This one mixes things up a bit by being a simple shoot 'em up rather than a platformer, and you just go along, you shoot the enemies. There are no power-ups as such apart from the restore health ones which you've seen before, and at the end there'll be a boss. The fourth game I'm going to look at is the one I consider to be the most difficult, and that is Operation Ship, or SWAB's Hassel Imprisoned Player. The reason I consider this, along with the game I'll be playing after, to be the most difficult in the collection is because you don't really have a ranged attack, you just have this short range punch type attack. As a result, you have to get very close to enemies in order to kill them, and this makes you vulnerable. As you can see, I actually failed here and got a game over screen, but when you do that you just go back to the title screen and you have to start the game or level over again. Your progress on the other levels or characters or games or whatever you want to call them is not lost. The final game I'm going to play is Operation Cheese, or Compact Hero Escapes Enemies' Zesty Entrapment. This one also gives you no ranged attack, but your character is a bit smaller, which I feel makes it easier. And there you have it. With the last of the games cleared, the credits will roll and you'll eventually be returned to the title screen. I'd like to end things by thanking Rockman for purchasing the unit and Sean Riddle for dumping it, and there you go, that is one of the rarer plug and play units now emulated, and it will be supported in the next version of MAME.